And yeah, it's great to be here, actually in a studio. So it's first time since a long while. Unfortunately, you all have to connect live, but that's a good one. I think we're getting there eventually. So I'm super excited to be part of this Microsegmentation Day, because segmentation is one of those, I would say, basic security measures that have to be implemented. And we will see how microsegmentation can actually facilitate that process by disconnecting from the physical connections of normal network segmentation. So today, as mentioned, I will be talking about the practical benefits of microsegmentation and within how it fits within a strategic cybersecurity program. All right, so we will go through these topics. I will give a quick introduction of Procopio, a newborn company that I founded at the beginning of the year, microsegmentation pros and cons, and then use cases of microsegmentation, practical ones, which hopefully will be beneficial to reflect on how this can be done in different environments. And then how microsegmentation fits in a holistic cybersecurity strategy. Then, if there will be time, we will have some questions and answers, hopefully. Otherwise, we can collect them and maybe reply later. We have a panel at the end of the session. We can collect some questions. So who am I and why am I even here to speak about microsegmentation? So I've been a Chief Information Security Officer for around 15 years in big enterprises, telco typically, but also recently in healthcare. I'm currently, as mentioned, Managing Director of Procopio. I have 25 years of experience in IT, networking, DevOps, and in digital transformations, I would say complex environments. I have certifications in information security, cloud security, risk management, business continuity, supply chain security, all things which are, I think, important for the topic we are discussing about. I consider myself a business enabler, meaning I have a very technical background, but I also look into how to challenge and how to engage with the business or with C levels. I like to try and converge with technical requirements, but also normative, legal, regulatory requirements, which are very, very important for organizations as well to adhere to comply with. I think of myself as a strategic thinker, meaning that I like to see the big picture, but then identify those high priority areas of risk in which we can immediately do some quick wins on, but that are still convergent with the overall strategy. So Procopio, quick introduction, new company. The ambition is to be a strategic advisor for organizations that want to implement their cybersecurity strategy, define their cybersecurity program, use best practices, international standards, etc. I strive to identify best fit solutions, or innovative products which can help the organization, that are not just fancy products, but are products which can really help the business because they could be relevant for that specific context. And then supporting and managing these solutions and supporting the customer by doing the managed services overall for them. The methodology, and this I think is interesting beyond just the fact that Procopio does it, but the fact that it's important to understand what the business does. And based on that, you will identify what are those areas, priority processes, which are really fundamental and critical for the business. Having identified that, then you can look into more details, see what assets, what systems are supporting those processes, and who are the stakeholders that are involved. What data is being processed, and how this should be classified in a way that then you can define what security measures to implement. Assessing risk is, again, super important. Baseline typically against the international standards, so we can mention NIST, ISO 27000, PCI DSS, whatever is relevant for that business. And especially doing it not through manual one-off exercises, but implementing it in a way that it can be repeatable in time, because this is a never-ending program. It's a never-ending process. Therefore, the use of tools like GRC, IRMs that allow to identify the scope, identify the assets, and then monitor and manage in time how the threats evolve, how the vulnerabilities are evolving again, and then how to minimize the risks by also planning the remediation actions. The overall objective is to build resilience, meaning this is a very broad term. It's very hyped recently, but essentially what it should mean is that organizations should be in the condition of being able to respond to incidents. Therefore, building capabilities for protecting, detecting, responding, and rapidly recovering from adverse events, because they happen and they will happen eventually. Therefore, the overall package is being able to do this consistently. It doesn't happen overnight. Therefore, it will take some time to build and to implement. So it needs to be done in a sustainable way. That's why I was also referring to building a program which can be repeated in time, because this is a continuous journey which needs to evolve and continuously improve. So let's jump into the topic of today, microsegmentation, pros and cons. When we talk about microsegmentation, the big difference against traditional network segmentation is that it allows you to see a business context. So you will identify applications which are common, which communicate with each other, which interact, which have interdependencies between each other, and therefore they give you a business view of your environment, disconnecting it from the physical devices which are actually supporting it. This is the first benefit. The second one is visibility. Immediately as you enable one device with microsegmentation, it's like switching on a flashlight. You immediately start seeing who is connecting with that device that's being connected with microsegmentation, and you will see flows. You will identify all the relationships that you have with that device. As you add more and more, then the flashlight increases, and you will have more and more visibility over the overall scope. And connected to this is granularity as well. The host is one level, but you will be able to see the processes which are interacting with other hosts and with other processes on the endpoint, the other ends. Therefore, you will have this very deep visibility of what protocols are running, what interactions are happening between systems at a very granular level. Agility and flexibility is another very important benefit of microsegmentation. It gives the freedom to plan, and we will see at the end of the presentation how this could be set up, to plan how to implement it. If you would do this, implement segmentation in a traditional way, essentially you would need to maybe swap a device, a switch, configure a VLAN, or introduce a new firewall, do configurations, and this could impact multiple systems at the same time, those probably on the same VLAN segment, etc. Microsegmentation allows you to identify the scope and progressively implement the solution and distribute it on the environment and on the perimeter that you have decided. Therefore, it gives you this agility, freedom of planning, plus the flexibility of, again, being independent of the physical environment. So we will see, again, one of the use cases later that it will be possible to move around your hosts, your devices, in different environments, but not losing the business or application context. That is extremely useful, I would say, especially in our dynamic world in which things keep on changing. And it's one of the biggest benefits of microsegmentation. Then centralized management, again, it's a no-brainer. Being able to view with one single pane of glass a map. I think we will see this in the workshops later. There are multiple tracks, one on business and one more on the technical side. You will see definitely the dashboard, you will see the console. You will be able to see a map of all the devices, but then you'll be able to drill down into the individual connections and understand who's talking to who. That's easy, but then exactly what protocol is being involved and what kind of interaction is happening. Plus, in addition to that, all the information which is collected, all the events which are collected by this console will become a log source towards your SOC, towards a SIEM environment, which then you can correlate with all the other information which comes from the other log sources. Okay, there's a lot of pros. I've mentioned specifically one con. I think this is, it's fair to say. Again, it's based on software. So microsegmentation, the biggest difference is based on software. And by the way, it's the biggest advantage as well. But on the other hand, you are still introducing an external component on your devices. Therefore, it needs to be tested. It needs to be verified. You must verify the performance. Of course, it's a very lightweight agent. The hosts are, they can be, as we said, because of the agility and flexibility, this can be done in a progressive way, therefore really verifying that there's no big impact from the fact that you've introduced a software component on the endpoint. Plus, there's opportunity of installing the agent actually on the network interface, therefore disconnecting from the operating system. And actually, the software agent, which is very lightweight, as I said, has a low impact on performance, works well on legacy environments, virtual environments, VDIs, etc. Next is the use cases. So here I will show some practical scenarios in which microsegmentation can increase, the resilience of the organization. And microsegmentation being the isolation or making the environment independent of the physical infrastructure. So the first use case would be the most typical one, on-premises. Okay, maybe not so relevant today, but eventually it will become, but still probably in some environments it still is, where you might have workstations, desktops, office, meaning desktop environments, and then server environments, databases, development environment, and data centers. In this case, it's very straightforward to implement, probably the most typical environment, and microsegmentation can be, again, implemented very quickly, progressively, as more comfortable for who needs to implement it without big disruptions, without having to replace physical equipment, without having to introduce new devices. Greenfield, this is actually very interesting because I would say segmentation by design would give a good starting point for who is building up a new infrastructure to then be able to have all of those advantages that we just saw before, the pros, understanding that it will be the infrastructure will be future-proof. It will be very difficult to lose track of devices which are connected on the internet, on the network, which are interacting with different applications, because this will be fully managed since day one. This is, I think, a very interesting use case for these kind of scenarios. IT/OT convergence. So there's a need now. There's maybe it's a bit again of a hype, but IT/OT or convergence is happening. It's happening because it's opportunistic, because it's beneficial, it's efficient. You can reduce costs. Of course, you are increasing risks by doing that, and microsegmentation can allow to do this by minimizing the risks to very, very low levels while you're completely in control, because as I said, you have a console, you will be able to see exactly what's happening and you will be able to do fine-tuning. As I said, IT/OT, but OT meant in a broad sense, meant as a separate infrastructure, a separate network compared to the IT network. It could be in the telco world, it could be the core telco network. So being able to communicate between these networks, but still being able to segregate them properly, here microsegmentation could be extremely useful. Cloud and hybrid. So compared to traditional segmentation, I would say it's quite complex to have segmentation which is distributed between different environments, between on-premises and cloud environments. Microsegmentation can facilitate this process. And again, I really invite you to go look at the technical workshops, because you will see how you will have devices which are distributed across on-prem, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and you will only see one application flow. These will be seamless. It's not the infrastructure which is below is not important for microsegmentation. It will give you a clear business view and an application view. Therefore, extremely interesting use case. The other opportunity here, again connected to agility, flexibility, is the fact that if you are implementing microsegmentation on premises, and then you decide to do a migration or to move some systems into the cloud, this will be, let's say, transparent, because you will be free to move these applications, these devices into the different environments, but they will be still connected to the same application tag, which allows to do this migration in a very seamless and very quick way, and in a very comfortable, planned way that you feel completely in control of what's happening. Super important when you have an environment where you have consolidated legacy devices systems. It's the best solution would be to dismiss these systems because they're outdated, they're end of life, they cannot be patched. However, in some cases it's not possible. So what do? You would need to try and isolate them as much as possible. Contain them, but in some cases they still need to communicate with some other devices. Therefore, they have to interact with other systems. There are these interdependencies. There are users that need to connect to them. Therefore, here again, microsegmentation supports these environments. Therefore, the device that I said is software-based can be installed in mainframes, environments which are legacy and very difficult to install anything on them. This solution, microsegmentation, can support here as well. Transformation. This is connected, I would say, in general, because transformation activities are dynamic in nature. There's a lot of moving parts. Planning a digital transformation while, again, disconnecting from the physical boundaries, the physical legacies that you have, will facilitate this process, and it will allow, on one hand, to implement the segmentation in a controlled way, in a controlled environment, and two, will help this convergence. You might have different departments doing it. You might want to begin the transformation by addressing multiple areas. The flexibility that microsegmentation provides will facilitate the overall process of a digital transformation. This, again, is very, very important. Okay, now I like to always consider when I have a requirement, there is a risk to be mitigated. I like to understand where this risk is. Where is it positioned in my holistic strategy, and what am I doing, and how am I going to mitigate that risk? So identifying then the security measure that I will implement, understand where it will provide the benefit, because then I will be able to measure how I'm progressing within the overall phases of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a very complex domain. It's made up of different phases. I'm using the NIST framework because it gives a very easy to understand, very visual representation of what these phases are. NIST uses 5 phases, and we can go through each of them to see how microsegmentation provides its benefit. So in the identify phase, this is where you would assess your assets, understand the data which is processed, classify it, understand the stakeholders that are involved, map the systems and see where they are physically located. So this is an extremely important task. Many companies, many organizations don't do this properly, or essentially they underestimate it. This can be kept under control by, as I said before, integrating with a GRC and IRM that you will be able to put together and maintain this information in a structured way, possibly connecting it with a CMDB. But realistically, what happens is that it's very difficult to keep this information updated. So you might run a one-off program. You might have a program, but then it's based on Excel. And maintaining it is extremely, it introduces efforts on multiple stakeholders, because you will have multiple people that are experts in their vertical domains needing to provide their information. And therefore it becomes messy, it becomes, there are human errors. The best would be to implement a structured program, an IRM, a GRC tool for doing that. So how can microsegmentation support this? As we mentioned before, one of the biggest benefits that microsegmentation brings is visibility. But visibility which is not one-off. It's a visibility which is continuous. It's there. You will see the flows. You will see everything which is happening continually on your network, on your environment that you have defined. So I've highlighted here in yellow where I believe that microsegmentation provides an active contribution to the overall holistic strategy. If we move over to the protect phase, we will see that here typically you would have solutions which are firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, which typically prevent actions, malicious events from happening, attacks from happening. This is the first layer. Then you might have multiple layers. What microsegmentation can contribute here, again, it's an active benefit that it's bringing, is preventing unauthorized traffic to happen. Therefore, here we can talk or bring the example of a ransomware attack. We will ensure that the solution will block any unauthorized traffic which will happen, so propagation which happens laterally, and only allow those approved application flows between the applications that have been identified and grouped together in that application scope. In the detect phase, here the phase would be identifying if the protective measures have failed, therefore there's been some sort of compromise. It might be a light compromise, it might be a much broader one. However, the quicker you can detect that something has gone wrong, the quicker you will be able to contrast it and try to react to it, and by lowering the impact that that event can have on your enterprise. Here, I did not highlight it in yellow because there's no real direct benefit coming from microsegmentation. However, the indirect benefit is that the information which is collected by the platform, and again, I invite you to go and see the workshop later on, because it will give a practical view of the console, the events which are collected, how these can then be fed into a SIM. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. We will be able to feed this information, all these events which are happening, be them authorized, allowed, or not allowed, that's up to you to decide. You will be able to feed this information in a SIM, correlated with all the other log sources which are already connected to the SIM, and then being able to detect quicker and maybe even just identify some weak signals which are not actually attacks, but there are some activities, could they be reconnaissance, but activities, malicious actions which are already happening in the environment, be it external and internal user trying to identify some systems on the network, etc., etc. Respond is a very important phase of cybersecurity. The idea here is that, again, it's highlighted in yellow because microsegmentation provides an active contribution here. You will define certain policies, configurations that will have microsegmentation react to certain events. One of these reactions, there are multiple of course, will be to, of course, block traffic. It will be to contain, but it could be also to isolate a device from the network itself, removing it completely. And this is typically one of the response actions that you would have in case of a compromise. Identify that there's a system which is behaving strangely, and you haven't identified yet why it's behaving strangely. You might want to, again, might not, but it depends on each situation is different. But you might come to a point in which you will need to isolate that device because you feel that it's been heavily compromised, and therefore, you will need to do additional actions on it. The last phase is the recover phase. Again, here I believe that microsegmentation can provide an indirect benefit, which is related to the fact that it will provide very detailed visibility of what events have happened, and also the chronological order in which these events have happened. What were the interactions between the systems, between the applications, before there was a compromise? It might even be not directly connected to the incident itself, but it could help to identify some weaknesses that were present in the environment, in the network, in the systems, and plan for what recovery helps for also is identify the root cause. Root cause will then give you some lessons learned, will help you understand where these weaknesses were, and then plan for continual improvement. And this will feed again into the identify phase, in which you will say, wow, I thought I had this situation under control. I thought I had effective security measures in place. This actually wasn't the case because I had a compromise. Therefore, I need to do something about it. So microsegmentation will give a lot of additional details of what had happened on the network between hosts, between applications, before there was that negative event, before there was that compromise. And this is a wrap of the holistic strategy. So holistic, if you want to have a cybersecurity strategy which you can consider as holistic, you need to cover all of these 5 phases. Can you do them all at the same time? You could. It depends on your budget, depends on the resources you have. Would you want to build them all up in parallel, or would you want to build up some before and then come to the others? Okay, essentially, you need to build them all up. But then your strategy would be depending on what your business is doing and what your priorities are, and that you identify in the top-down analysis that I was mentioning before. Identify what your strategy for implementing the NIST framework should be like. You want to interact with systems, you want to do them in parallel, etc. The last practical implementation here would be, okay, love it, how do I do it? Again, microsegmentation facilitates this process because the first step would be identify a small scope. A few systems, a few hosts, implement the agent on that and switch it on. Monitor what's happening without enforcing. Therefore, you will see, as I mentioned before, the flashlight providing light in the whole environment. You will see flows between applications. You will see things that you never even imagined of, most probably. And then all of this information you can feed into a SOC. And you will be able to correlate with other events coming from other log sources. And you will immediately have this visibility, which is required to understand what's going on. At a certain point, you'll say, I'm comfortable. I can switch to enforcement mode, and therefore, from that moment onwards, you will be blocking any traffic which isn't properly approved. Next step, extend the scope. You can do this progressively. You can start small. You can see what happens. You can switch on, enable, see again the reaction, what would be any negative things, roll back, and then progressively extend the scope, which can be the single scope you've identified or adding a new application scope. I think this wraps up the overall presentation. Again, thank you for watching. And Giels, yeah?
Hi, Mario. Thanks for your excellent presentation.
Thank you.
So we got a few questions for the audience. I would like to start with the one from Heida. You mentioned that a lot of teams need to be involved to make this a success. So if you are not organized properly in your organization, what advice could you give the audience where to start from an organizational perspective? Who are the must-haves within that, I would say, multidisciplinary organization or structure or project team?
Yeah, so this is a very good question because typically what would happen is that IT departments would take the lead and say, it's a technical topic, we have to implement it, we're going to segment networks, this is how we do it, but then it might not actually be practical for the overall organization. So what microsegmentation allows you to do indeed is distribute the overhead and the responsibility also of classifying certain flows between the applications. So that will allow you to interact in a dynamic way with full involvement of all the stakeholders, which are the application stakeholders. So extending this discussion to the rest of the company, which is actually the right way, the right approach. Right?
Yeah. And how do you see the role of security? Because I mentioned a couple of times, and I think you did as well, security is typically perceived as the department of no. So what role do you see them play in that whole structure?
Again, the good question, and it shouldn't be that way. So it's not Mr. No, but security should be the enabler of the business. It's that solution, it's that glue which allows the business ideas to actually come to light in a way that they can be sustainable. We can think about home banking. Yep. Would we ever imagine that we would expose a bank to the internet some time ago? Probably one would say, these guys are crazy. But it happened, and we might see some hacks now and then, but essentially security should facilitate the business to enable their business ideas and do it in a secure way.
Yep. Okay, so you touch on the topic OT and IT. It is becoming a reality. But the OT organizations are typically run by manufacturing owners that are doing it the old traditional ways. So how can we persuade them to think about microsegmentation in general?
Yeah, again, this is a great opportunity for those environments in which it's very complex, and we talked about legacy, but we can also talk about very specific, specialized solutions, which definitely can open up a bit more. Again, we were talking about air gap systems some time ago. But then what happens is, and we've seen some incidents, recent incidents in the US, water companies that have
oil
pipeline. Yep. And at the end of the day, why do these things happen? Because it's convenient, because it's necessary to have this sort of convergence. So it's a great idea that who produces those solutions can actually think a bit ahead and again expose a bit to risks, but then be able to understand them and to contain them, to make things sustainable in a way that they can actually be implemented in today's environments, which require this. You cannot have any more dedicated teams for physical systems, right? Only in very, very specific, I would say, extremely high-risk environments, this is a true necessity.
Yeah, so at least from your story, my takeaway is that with microsegmentation, especially with the ways you suggested, you get a lot more information about the application flows. Yeah. And that should be at least the starting position of all discussions.
Yeah, that's it's essentially the discovery phase. If we're talking about a context in which you're introducing it progressively. If you start greenfield, of course, you will have a huge advantage that you actually build up by design the microsegmentation. But if you need to introduce it, then the extremely valuable benefit is the discovery. Okay. Right? So you will immediately see these flows, and you will be able to then sit down together with the application managers that are responsible for that business process to understand, okay, these applications are doing these things, is it okay, should we review it? And then you maintain that in time. As new systems and new applications are being delivered, you will have your application manager that can then identify what the standard flows should be. And this is the normal way of doing things.
All right. Thank you very much. If there are any questions for the audience, please use the platform.
We will pick
Mario, again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation.